The gallows were built too high. They had to bring in a wooden box for her to stand on, because at 4 feet tall, she couldn't reach the noose without assistance. Her name was Hannah Ocuish. She was 10 years old. The date was December 20th, 1786, in New London, Connecticut. And she was about to become the youngest person executed in American history. Not the youngest person convicted, there were younger. Not the youngest person sentenced, there were younger still. But the youngest person actually hanged by the state, a distinction she holds to this day. This is the story of how colonial America put a child to death, and what that execution reveals about justice, childhood, and the evolution of how societies punish the young. Hannah was born in 1776 to an enslaved Native American woman. Her father's identity was never recorded. She was born into a legal status that didn't quite classify her as enslaved, but didn't grant her freedom either. In Connecticut at that time, children of enslaved Native American mothers existed in a gray area, not property exactly, but not citizens with rights. By age 6, Hannah had been placed with families as an indentured servant, moved from household to household, her labor traded for minimal food and shelter. By all accounts, Hannah had a violent temper and behavioral problems that modern psychologists might recognize as trauma responses or developmental disabilities. Contemporary records describe her as difficult, prone to rage, and unable to control her passions. In 1786, she was working for a family in New London. On July 21st of that year, she had an altercation with a 6-year-old white girl named Eunice Bolles. The details vary in historical accounts, but most agree that Eunice had reported Hannah for stealing strawberries. This accusation resulted in Hannah being beaten by her employer. On July 22nd, Hannah encountered Eunice alone near a road. What happened next was brutal. Hannah attacked Eunice with stones and her fists. She strangled the younger girl. Then, according to testimony, she attempted to make it look like an accident by arranging the body in a ditch. Eunice's body was found later that day. Witnesses had seen Hannah with Eunice. When questioned, Hannah initially denied involvement, then confessed to the killing. The trial took place in December 1786. Hannah had no legal representation. Children, especially Native American children, had no right to counsel. The trial lasted 1 day. The prosecution presented her confession and testimony from witnesses who'd seen her with Eunice. The defense, such as it was, consisted of Hannah's own testimony that she'd been angry about being beaten for something Eunice had reported. The jury deliberated for less than an hour, guilty of murder. The judge sentenced her to hang, with execution scheduled for December 20th. What's striking in the court records is the absence of any discussion about Hannah's age or capacity. No one argued she was too young to understand her actions. No one suggested her background of violence and instability should mitigate her sentence. The legal system of 1786 Connecticut operated on the principle that children above age 7 could form criminal intent and should be punished as adults. Hannah was 10. By this logic, she was fully culpable, but there was public discomfort. Newspaper accounts from the period reveal that the execution of a 10-year-old troubled even a society accustomed to harsh justice. Reverend Henry Channing, who attended Hannah in her final days, wrote extensive accounts of her imprisonment. He described teaching her to pray, to read Bible passages, to express repentance for her crime. His writings reveal a fascinating tension. He believed Hannah's execution was legally justified, but seemed troubled by executing someone so young that she needed instruction in basic religious concepts. On the morning of December 20th, Hannah was brought from her cell. Contemporary accounts describe her as composed, perhaps not fully understanding what was about to happen. She'd been told she would die and go to heaven if she repented. She'd expressed repentance repeatedly to Reverend Channing, possibly because she'd learned it was what adults wanted to hear. She was taken to the gallows in a cart. A crowd, estimated at several thousand, gathered to witness the execution. Public hangings were common entertainment in this era, but this one was different. Multiple accounts note the uncomfortable silence as Hannah was led to the gallows, the absence of the usual jeering and commentary that accompanied adult executions. The executioner placed the noose around her neck. She stood on the wooden box. Last words were traditional at public executions. Hannah's, as recorded by witnesses, were brief. "I am sorry I killed Eunice." Then, the box was removed. Death wasn't instant. Hanging technology of the era often resulted in slow strangulation rather than quick neck breakage. Accounts note it took several minutes for Hannah to stop moving. The crowd dispersed quietly. She was buried in an unmarked grave in the prison cemetery. The execution of Hannah Ocuish sparked debate that continued for years. Legal scholars argued about whether children her age should be subject to capital punishment. Some used religious arguments. Children were innocent until age 12 or 13, the age of moral reasoning. Others used practical arguments. Executing children served no deterrent purpose because other children couldn't comprehend the consequences. But these debates didn't change law immediately. It would be decades before American states began setting minimum ages for execution. Hannah wasn't the only child executed in early America. In 1642, Thomas Gronger, age 16 or 17, was hanged in Plymouth Colony for bestiality. In 1644, a girl named Alice Clifton, age 12, was executed in Massachusetts for murdering a child. In 1748, a 10-year-old girl in Diaries, Pennsylvania, was hanged for killing her mistress. These cases were relatively rare, but not shocking to colonial sensibilities. Childhood, as we understand it, a protected period of development, didn't exist as a legal or social concept. Children were small adults, expected to work, to understand right from wrong, to face adult consequences for adult crimes. The shift began in the 19th century. Reformers influenced by Enlightenment ideas about human development argued that children's brains weren't fully formed, that they couldn't reason like adults, that punishment should account for age and capacity. The juvenile justice system emerged from these ideas, creating separate courts and facilities for young offenders. The first juvenile court opened in Chicago in 1899. By the early 20th century, most states had laws prohibiting execution of defendants under 16. But the United States continued executing juvenile offenders, those who committed crimes while under 18, far longer than other developed nations. Between 1900 and 2005, America executed 366 juvenile offenders. The youngest was 14 at the time of his crime. George Stinney, a black teenager, was executed by electric chair in South Carolina in 1944 at age 14 for allegedly murdering 2 white girls. His conviction was vacated in 2014, 70 years after his execution, when a judge ruled he hadn't received a fair trial. The racism inherent in his case, black youth charged with killing white children in the Jim Crow South, mirrors the racial dynamics of Hannah Ocuish's case, where a Native American child killed a white child in a society built on racial hierarchy. The United States Supreme Court finally banned juvenile executions in 2005 in Roper v. Simmons, ruling that executing defendants who were under 18 at the time of their crimes violated the Eighth Amendment's prohibition against cruel and unusual punishment. The vote was 5-4. The majority opinion cited international law, scientific evidence about adolescent brain development, and evolving standards of decency. The dissent argued that some crimes were so heinous that age shouldn't matter, that states should retain the right to execute the most dangerous young offenders. Today, looking back at Hannah Ocuish's execution, we see it as barbaric. A 10-year-old child, herself a victim of systemic violence and neglect, was hanged by a state that never asked whether she deserved life rather than death. But in 1786, the execution was legally uncontroversial, even if emotionally troubling. This shift in perspective reveals how much our understanding of childhood and justice has evolved, and how recently those changes occurred. Yet we still struggle with the question of how to punish children who commit terrible crimes. The United States has approximately 2,500 prisoners, serving life without parole for crimes committed when they were juveniles. Many were sentenced in the 1990s during the super predator panic, when prosecutors and politicians argued that some young offenders were irredeemable and should be permanently removed from society. The Supreme Court has since limited life without parole for juveniles, but hasn't banned it entirely. These prisoners, now adults, live with sentences imposed when they were teenagers, punished for crimes committed when their brains weren't fully developed. Hannah Ocuish killed a 6-year-old child. This fact is undeniable and horrible. Eunice Bolles' life was taken by violence. Her family's grief was real and lasting. Justice demands accountability. But what form should accountability take when the perpetrator is herself a child? Colonial Connecticut answered by building gallows tall enough to hang a 10-year-old. We've moved past that answer, but we haven't fully resolved the question. The historical site where Hannah was executed is now a parking lot in New London. There's no plaque, no memorial, nothing to mark that a child died there at the hands of the state. Her grave, if it still exists, is unmarked and forgotten. Eunice Bolles is buried in a cemetery nearby, her grave maintained and visited. This asymmetry of memory is itself a kind of judgment. One child victim remembered, another erased. Perhaps that's appropriate. Perhaps the child who killed doesn't deserve memorialization. Or perhaps Hannah Ocuish deserves to be remembered precisely because her execution represents a form of injustice our society has since rejected. Not because she was innocent, she wasn't, but because executing a 10-year-old child reveals a legal system that had lost sight of basic humanity in its pursuit of retribution. If you want to explore more stories about childhood, justice, and how societies evolve in their understanding of punishment, subscribe to Prison Diaries. Because Hannah Ocuish's story reminds us that the past isn't just a different time, it's a different moral universe. And understanding how we got from there to here matters for understanding where we might go next.